Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our Rule of Life Toolbox Week 4. It's great to have with us Bill and Joe, who are going to be sharing some of their experiences as we look at tool number 4. But before we get there, just a brief introduction. Bill and Joe, you're part of St Mary's Chipping Norton, which is great. How long have you been coming to St Mary's now?
Since, what is it, 2014?
2014, so getting on to 6 years.
Yeah, 6 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Has that gone quickly? Has that been a good time in your life on the whole?
I know, there's some much older ones than me.
Brilliant, good.
Yeah, it's been great.
Great. Well, it's really good to have you with us, and thank you for giving up your time. And today we're looking at tool number 4, which is fasting, the spiritual discipline of fasting, which is something that probably most people are aware of, but not something that we tend to talk about a great deal, I don't think. We'll go into a bit more of the nuts and bolts of it. And I hear that you have been trying out a bit of fasting as a bit of a spiritual discipline. So it'd be great to hear from you on that. So I suppose the first question, really, just to open us up, is, what is fasting basically, and how specifically does it fit in with the Christian tradition, the Christian life?
Yeah, well, we're very much beginners. We got into it during lockdown, really, so for us, we did a little bit of reading about where it comes from, because it's something that's a bit alien to us today, to our culture. It's just having food on tap, and the idea of going without is a little bit scary, I think, for a lot of people. But we did quite a bit of reading about kind of how it was really common in the early church, and to do it, it's very much like a collective thing that they used to do, and there was probably more fasting than feasting, really. And I think our culture is very much focused around feasting,
never being hungry, and never being hungry.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas for them, the opposite was true. So I just found that quite interesting, that it was so common in the way that they did faith and life. And maybe you want to share a bit more about the book that we read.
Yeah. So we read a book called Eat, Fast and Feast by J.W. Richards, and it goes through basically looking at the sort of church traditions around it and the church practice, particularly in the early kind of Christian church, where there was like 200 days of various kinds of fasting, of eating, either eating less food or eating no food, or eating particular kinds of food, and I think that really kind of appealed to us as well during lockdown, where we had a bit more time to sort of think about things. When you look into Scripture, and I think there's almost a kind of expectation in Scripture that people are fasting, because Jesus says, when you fast, don't be like the hypocrites and like make a big kind of thing of it, but actually just kind of do it quietly in your own homes. And so that sort of really appealed to us.
Cool, great. And I suppose then, following on from that, you've already kind of stated that it's important, particularly it takes us back to the early church practice and kind of revisiting that. Is it something that you think is applicable for everyone? Or, I think sometimes it's easy to say, well, that kind of works for you and that doesn't really work for me, or that works for you. Do you think fasting, as you've been exploring it, is something that should become part of, in some way, the part of every Christian's lifestyle?
I think there are lots of reasons why you might not be able to do it, for health reasons. I think that if you are able, it's a really good thing to try, but it's not something that you can just dive straight into. We definitely found that it's a bit like a muscle. You have to build up. So start with a manageable fast, a manageable length of time, and then build up from there, and don't just dive straight in with a huge. I think it's something to kind of build up slowly, and like neither of us really thought we'd be able to do it before we did it, to be honest. So it's definitely something that you can kind of, if you've never done it before, that you'll surprise yourself, I think. And the main thing is that it kind of makes you more alert to what God might be saying, or just aware of your reliance on food and your reliance on it to maybe give you a mood lift or a kind of
comfort.
Comfort, and it strips that away so that you're actually relying on God and seeking Him a bit more. So I think it's actually really helpful discipline. You've got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I would say is, well, I have tried it in the past, and where it's, maybe church is having a day where we're kind of praying about something in particular and encouraging people to fast. And I found those days really hard in the past. But what I've kind of taken this more of a practice you build up to, one of the things that you find is actually our very carb, sugar-rich diets that we have actually make it much harder to do it, because our body instantly kind of goes into a craving as soon as you stop eating. And this kind of book that we talked about, actually going to some earlier diets that people would have had, maybe kind of higher fat diets rather than high carb diets and high sugar diets, less processed food, and therefore actually building up and having food, abstinence from food, it feels less painful, and it kind of goes into more of a normal practice. So that's kind of, we've been on a sort of 40 sort of day journey with changing the diet, and then maybe on some days going to 16 hours of fasting, and then 20 hours of fasting, and building up to 23 hours of fasting, and then having maybe a day where you fast, and then 2 days where you fast. And so you build up in that way over a number of weeks.
Yeah, sure.
Much easier to do it than just going, right, I'm going to fast hard the next 3 days, and really struggling with it.
Cutting the carbs is quite key, because that's what makes you hungry. So yeah.
And one thing I would add just as well, is feasting is actually really important as well. So one of the things that we've done as part of this is always making Sunday a feast day. And it makes it kind of the Lord's Day, as it were, sort of even more special, because we look forward to it, because it's something where we sort of say, right, we're going to eat normally today and actually celebrate the Sunday. And it also gives you something to look forward to in the week as well, from a sort of food point of view.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that, the fact that we've created these diets where we're so dependent on the food that we eat more than we realize. So we have to almost get rid of our dependence before we can start to actually find a sustainable discipline, I suppose, which is, I might have to reconsider some of what goes into my body, but it's challenging. We have everything we want in the supermarkets. So you've talked a little bit there about not kind of just diving straight in and working out a way to get into it. Can you just share kind of briefly with us what that kind of looks like day to day then, sort of, when you fast, how it might fit in with kind of prayer life and that sort of thing, just to get us thinking about that?
Well, so we both started off with a kind of half day, so missing one meal. So it might be breakfast or it might be evening meal. And I think it's quite important to then think ahead about how you're going to use that time that you would have been eating, because I think, like, my tendency to begin with was just to pick the busiest day, because then I wouldn't be thinking about not eating. It kind of defies the point, because you want to set that time aside to pray or to seek God, so it's important to kind of maybe think ahead about how you can do that before going into the fast. And then we kind of built up from there, didn't we? Like going on to kind of 24-hour fast.
As I sort of said, it was over a period of weeks, but like the first one was missing breakfasts or one meal, and then maybe missing breakfast and lunch, and just having 4 hours in the back end of the day where you could eat, and then going up to 1 hour at the end of the day where you could eat. And and it was never kind of like calorie counter or anything like that. It was quite nice. And it was like, I'm looking forward to this one meal I'm going to have today at this time. And then actually one of the apps that Ramon mentioned, the 1 minute app, I think 1 Minute Pause it's called, on his Toolbox talk. He encouraged me to look at that a few months back. And that was about actually having a moment where it forces you to stop and pause at that point. And I found when I would be having lunch, if I take that time to just have a moment to really just pause and just have a conversation with God, and just to give everything to God at that time, the fast almost kind of took on a new spiritual dimension that moved it from just being a kind of a medical, nutritional thing to actually something that was quite spiritual. And it just opened you up a little bit more to just hearing the Spirit in those times. I think if you're full and you're kind of not feeling any sort of sense of hunger or anything, it's actually it's harder, I think, to sort of really stop and listen. Whereas if your body's kind of in a hunger sense, you just seem to be you're more aware of your feelings and emotions and what's going on, and then you can also sort of, I won't say we've got this nailed at all, but you just start discerning one or two other things. And it does feel like it's just kind of, I can see why the sort of early church made it such an important practice, because it does seem to give you more of a spiritual awareness.
Interesting. That's great. I mean, I imagine like getting stuck into it, there will be times which are quite challenging when you're really just thinking, I'm hungry, I can't really operate properly, I just need the food, and you have to hold that discipline there. But and I'm sure that will be challenging for anyone that is trying to get into fasting and continue that as well. But if there was, if someone was interested in this, what might you say, I suppose, to encourage them to say, actually, it's really worth giving a shot? What are the joys and the, if you like, the deep spiritual satisfaction that you have experienced so far that you might want to, as it were, sell to other people?
I think it's been quite helpful. I mean, because we've done it together, it's been actually quite helpful to have someone to do it with. Okay. And obviously in a marriage, that's one way. But I also think, for singles or people who the partner can't or doesn't want to fast, actually just maybe partnering up with someone to do it. Because I do think I've actually had a few other friends who've gone through the same process as well. They're on WhatsApp, and it's sort of a bit of a community of us now, sort of about 5 or 6 who've done it. And it's actually been quite interesting talking about it a lot, together, and kind of riding the journey together. And when we've had a bad day and it hasn't quite gone to plan, or when we found a recipe that sort of fits the diet that's recommended, to help sharing that around. And that's definitely kind of just been a bit of boost. And when we've had some real kind of successes, health as well as spiritual, it's actually just kind of great to sort of celebrate that together. I also think, I'd recommend the book. I also think just start small. Just try and skip one meal and do it with a real intent. Don't do it because you're busy and you're just kind of skipping a meal, but actually think, I'm going to put a time aside over lunchtime. I'm not going to have lunch. I'm just going to get my Bible out when I would be having lunch, preparing it. And just, even if it's 10, 15 minutes in that time, you'll probably feel hungry and you'll probably feel a bit like, oh, I'm missing lunch. Yeah. And if you can, it won't be easy, but if you can do that, you can start building the habit of it. And then it kind of comes easier and easier from there. Add anything to that?
I'd agree. I think it's I think it feeds into other areas of your life. So if you can develop a discipline in going without food, then it's self-control is a bit like a muscle again. And I've never said that analogy before. And then gives you the confidence that you can have self-control in other areas of your life too, and God can grow that in other areas. So I think it makes you aware of how you can bring other areas of your life under God's control as well. So I think it's to do with food, but I think it has a wider impact actually. So
Great, thank you. No, that's really helpful. There's lots of, as it were, food for thought there, or should I say, food for thought. I couldn't help but say, put that one in. That's really great. Thank you both for sharing. I'm sure there's loads more you could say on that, but that's really helpful. Could you just remind us of the book again? We'll whack it on the website as well so people can access.
It's Eat, Fast, Feast.
Eat, Fast, Feast.
By J.W. Richard, I think it is.
Perfect. Good. Well, we'll get that on the website. But can I just say thanks so much to you both, Bill and Joe, for giving up your time and for sharing those experiences. And I hope it's beneficial to those of you watching, and bless you both as you continue in your Christian journey, and particularly in your discipline of fasting together. So thanks a lot. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Bye-bye.